Welcome back, everybody, to the Little Less Fear podcast. Welcome back, everybody, to a Little Less Fear podcast. And here we are continuing with Pride Month, Pride 2021. And I'm more than happy and super duper duper happy to introduce Demitri Wylde. Thank you so much. His handle name for Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok is his name, which is Demitri Wylde. That's D as in dog, Emitri Wylde. He has a book that's called All Was Nothing in the Time of Champions. That is a book of poetry. He has his own podcast called Cosmic Journey with Demi and Jay, which is a podcast on science and spirituality, the two S's. Welcome to my show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. I'm so excited to interview you and ask you these questions. And first of all, thank you so much for taking your time and for being open, because talking about some of this stuff isn't easy for a lot of people. So I really appreciate you being brave about this.
Thank you.
So in dedication for Pride Month, LGBTQIA month, I'm going to be asking you some coming out stories. And first question for the audience is, when did you first come out? How long ago how long ago was it?
I've barely been in the closet, truthfully, my entire life. But I definitely had a lot, I came out when I was 15. And it was by accident. I didn't intend to come out. It just kind of happened. But my mom already knew. So at that time, we had just moved to Riverside, and I had just started my second semester of sophomore year in high school at a new school. And I was very much the new kid, the middle of the year. It was a complicated time. It was also a very interesting time of growth for me, because I had met my first boyfriend on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And we dated for a whole 2 weeks.
Hey, 2 weeks is a long time in high school.
I know, but it felt like 2 years at that point. But it became the backbone of who I am today. And it was during that time that me and my ex-boyfriend used to write letters to each other at lunchtime and pass them to each other. And my mom had a habit of doing my laundry when I was at home.
Uh-huh.
And she had found one of the letters. And granted, she already kind of knew that I was gay.
Uh-huh.
I've never really been, I had girlfriends, yeah, but I never really did much other than kiss them occasionally. And
Mm-hmm.
it was very that. I was closeted bisexual for a while. I think that was mostly how I was closeting myself, was saying I was bisexual.
Yeah.
But
did your mom know that you were closeting yourself by saying you were bisexual? Or this is even
no, she didn't even know that I was saying I was bisexual. It was mostly just to my school friends and stuff.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I just didn't really want to bring it up or anything. Now when she found out, I was in my grandma's house, and I was just playing video games or something, and she told me to can you pause for a second? I said, yeah, sure. I think I was playing Kingdom Hearts at the time. But
and did you think anything at that moment when she said that?
Well, it's usually, my mom doesn't usually bother me until there's something
Mm-hmm.
that she needs to talk about. And so I was kind of okay. And typical 16-year-old, eyes rolled to the back of the head. Okay, mom, whatever. Yeah. let me stop what I'm doing just for you.
Yeah. right.
And so she sits down, and I'm like, okay, she's sitting down next to me. What's going on here? And she just puts her arm around me, and she goes, honey, who's Josh? And I said, what do you mean? And I'm sure my face turned beet red at that time, because I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And she pulls out this letter, and she's like, I just read this letter from Josh. And I was like, oh, you mean Joshina? I swear to God, I thought that I was covering it up so well. Someone's name is actually Joshina.
Wow, that's a good one.
I was just kind of beet red, and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah, deer in headlights, huh?
Deer in the headlights. And she just put her arm around me, and she goes, honey, it's okay, I love you, and blah 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 and all this. My mom's always been my biggest supporter and best friend. Actually, I'm happy that I get to see her again tomorrow. She's coming in early from where she was staying in Minnesota just now.
That's awesome.
and we're gonna go spend a couple days in Palm Springs. So
Oh yeah,
I think I told you that already.
that's
But
awesome.
but yeah, like my mom's always been like in my corner and my biggest supporter and my biggest fan. So I'm just thankful to have her.
So she was accepting right away. Who was the next person you told after that? That was like in your family.
I think she told my grandmother because we were
Mm.
living with my grandmother at the time. And again, my grandmother's another one of my like biggest like supporters and stuff. She's no longer with us. She passed away back in 2016 of
Sorry to
lung
hear
cancer,
that.
and I miss her every day. But she does talk to me all the time. So,
Oh yeah, sure.
um, and I'm sure she was the next one to know. And then I think my stepdad came shortly after that.
And how were they with the news?
Grandma was fine. Stepdad was whatever. He and I have had an up and down relationship most of my life, but he's not around anymore, so I don't have to worry about that anymore.
So then it sounds like overall you had a positive coming out story.
Yes. I did have a second coming out story though, and that one wasn't necessarily so pleasant. My grandmother on my dad's side, which is interesting. Now, mind you, backstory: my grandmother's daughter is a lesbian. Her niece is a lesbian. There's gay people on that side of the family.
Yeah.
But when I came out, either because I was like the oldest grandchild, I was an only child, but like I'm the oldest grandchild of that time, or I don't know what it was, but like the very conservative side of the family. My grandfather didn't care. He was whatever, but my grandmother flipped out mostly because of how she found out. And this was a little traumatic at the time, but they found porn on the
Oh
family
man,
computer.
no, no, no.
And
Oh man.
so that was shocking, first of all, and definitely was an experience with my grandmother that I never really wanted to have.
Yeah.
We didn't talk for a year afterwards.
Uh-huh.
But everybody else was like, it's fine. Shit happens, you know?
You think maybe
Um,
it's because she found out that way?
it was because she found out that way that she kind of overreacted that way.
Right.
So I understand it, but it was
Sure.
also kind of like, I I didn't mean for it to happen.
Mm.
So it was kind of like, you know, it was a lot at the time.
What about the social aspect of coming out? How was it with your friends in school and people around you?
At school, it was not a problem. I mean, after that, I had intended to lose my virginity to that boyfriend, but that didn't not happening. So I kind of went on a slut phase after a while.
Yeah. Oh man, a
So
lot of us do.
yeah, because you know, you have an idea of like what you want your first time to be, and then I'm actually very fortunate that the person that I did lose it to was very kind and had a very lovely experience with that. You can read about it actually on my blog on Medium. My hookup horror stories, the number one is about that experience. But yeah, I from a social perspective, I was always an alt kid. I was always like a punk kid, so like I never really kind of like fit in anywhere. So I fit in everywhere, if that makes sense.
Mhm. What do you mean a punk
Um,
kid? You mean like punk like in, because I think we're different, might be different generations. Like for me, punk is like an actual punk music type kid, or do you mean
oh,
someone who punks people
punk
around?
music. Like we would go to punk shows out in
Okay.
Corona. We would, you know, ska, like reggae
Yeah.
shows, like we would get in the mosh pit, like get hella wasted underneath the stairs, and you know,
Yeah.
sneak out at night. We were like that group, all
Uh-huh.
black, everything, mohawks. I've had several facial piercings. I've had my
So have
eyebrow, my
I.
my lip
Yeah.
pierced. I currently have tons of piercings, but um we were very much those kids. So like, you know, I did hang out with like a queer group of people naturally.
Mm. That sounds really good.
Yeah.
Could you think of a time where you were having a hard time with your sexuality?
Well, I mean, currently, um, I'm a sex writer. I definitely have I think there's a lot of trauma in sex, and I think there's a lot of like things that, you know, as gay men or queer people that we're not taught. We're not kind of like, you know, explain how things happen. So we kind of like fall into various traps and stuff like that. And
what do you mean explain how things happen?
well, like, everyone gets the birds and the bees talk. We
Right.
don't. We,
Sure.
we talk about how babies are made, but we don't make babies.
Right.
So we're not exactly taught, the ins and outs of the in and out. And we are kind of left to our own devices and learning through kind of like stumbling around in the dark. So I've had a lot of experiences, some great, some not so great, that left me kind of questioning, like, why, how did I get into this situation? Like, I've been in an abusive relationship. I've cheated on my ex-boyfriend. I a lot of things that just kind of like happen that we don't necessarily think about when we're getting the talk, And so I decided that I wanted to write about it as a way of processing it. And I started from the perspective of telling my own stories and chronicling those, and then going into like more of a sort of a how-to manual of like how to deal, because I'm an interpersonal communications major. I majored in communications in college. I'm also a journalist.
So did I got my bachelor's in mass communication.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of like my own way. It's almost like therapy for me, like writing about this stuff and choosing that as my kind of like medium for how to express and how to learn also, because I've been having sex for like 17 years now and I still have no idea how it works.
It's interesting you say this, because I recently heard something about this. I don't remember where, but it was about how gay men are not given the birds and the bees talk, just like you said right now. And it's like, of course there was so much, I don't know if there still is. Me personally, I've been sexually sober for years, but not because I really want to, but actually a tarot card reader told me that I'm not telling you that the reason why I've been is because I've held myself back. My spirit guide has held me back. But anyways, to learn and to grow, which is what I've been doing. And in the midst of learning and growing, I'm realizing and hearing this story often where gay men are not taught the birds and the bees. And it just, do you think that if birds and the bees talk about lesbians and gays and non-binaries and all that became more the norm, do you think there would be like less STDs and less promiscuity?
Probably not, truly.
Okay.
But because gay men are beasts, like let's be honest. But at the same time, if we were more aware of what it really means, perhaps we might make better choices. And that's ultimately what it is. It's not necessarily like abstaining. It's more along the lines of like just becoming aware of like how the culture is, because the culture itself is a different thing, and you don't really know until you get into the culture.
How would you explain the culture?
Well, here's the thing. Everyone loves Disney, right? Well, everyone kind of like is spoon-fed from a very young age of like this romantic notion of get into a relationship, you fall in love, you get married, you have sex, like blah blah blah. Well, that's not at all what it is. It's like, it's very kind of like in the moment. It could be impulsive. There's a lot of darkness involved in it as well. But it's just learning about how to navigate those dark corners without this kind of like rosy notion of how things should be, because that's not how they are. And so it's more along the lines of like, okay, well, how can I be better equipped to handle these situations if I ever come across these situations?
Right. That totally makes sense. It's kind of like that also in the I don't know how you would say it, cis normative maybe.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like you're talking about, you brought up Disney, and it made me think of like Disney princesses and like the prince and all that. I mean, they kind of have it in a way similar. I mean, I think that's why there's just so much confusion overall, because people just use the way of relying messages the wrong way, or people are taking it the wrong way.
Yeah.
One or the other.
you know, if you come at it from a cis heteronormative perspective as well, like, you know, they are spoon-fed the exact same thing. So, you know, people get married at a young age and they get divorced at a young age, and you know, they don't necessarily know how to navigate these interpersonal sectors of relationships because they have an idealized version of what it should be. And so for us as queer people, we kind of have to throw the whole book out the window because we can't even have that, you know what I mean? And so in therein lies a lot of like subcultures. You know, there's like a drug culture, then there's, you know, open relationships and all this kind of like extra things that now we have to navigate, and we're still not equipped to do it.
So that's what you mean by culture, like just the tiny little subcultures within the culture that make up the whole culture?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. If, I mean, I think it would be a really great idea if they started teaching this like relationship, how to be in a relationship, like from the time you're in elementary school, whether it's with a man or a woman or
you should
whoever.
be
Like,
taught interpersonal communication from like middle school.
Oh yeah, for sure.
At least.
So then now you've been out for how long? How many years have you been out now?
I came out 15, so yeah, like 17.
About 17 years. So what can you tell people who are struggling right now with either their sexuality or their identity, or whether or not they're gay? What can you tell somebody who has these questions in their head?
Well, I'm fortunate that I basically pretty much knew what I was from a young age. So I'm very fortunate in that respect.
Well, let me ask you this: how did you know who you were at a young age?
Oh, how did I know?
Yeah, how did you know?
I don't know how to answer that question. I just knew, you know, I'm fortunate in that respect, but from a lot of people who I've met and who I know that do question and kind of go back and forth on who they are. It's a process, and it's a learning process. You have to kind of like do the work and question yourself a lot, and it's just finding what works for you in a world that's not meant for you, if that makes sense. It
totally makes sense.
You basically have to you have to make your own rules. You have to like question everything, and, you know, over and over again at times. And you know, it's a whole process. And I think a lot of people, even like up until their 20s or 30s, that they still question these things. But you know, there's no time frame. You know, you don't have to have all the answers right at once. You don't have to like, you know, you don't have to know right away. And that's okay too. Just don't neglect it. Don't pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest part, is don't pretend it doesn't exist, because that's when it turns into depression.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
So I was looking through your awesome Instagram feed, and I saw that there was a while back where you dressed up as a woman, and you look gorgeous. How did that start? Was it somebody say, "Hey, try this on," and then you just tried it on, or were you like curious yourself at a young age? I mean, how did that start?
So we're in the age of RuPaul's Drag Race. I was, you know, I come from a theater background. The only classes that I make the joke that the only classes that I did well in was English and theater, and that may be true in high school. But I come from a theater background, and when I moved to Seattle back in 2010, a couple of years in, I was dating a DJ at the time, and we were out in nightclubs all the time, and we had friends that were queens, and I loved the show and all this stuff. It was our favorite thing to do. So I naturally kind of gravitated to it. And I did not until maybe a few months later did I get the opportunity to actually perform on stage and do all this stuff. And next thing you know, 6 months later, I was emceeing shows. So
that's so cool.
So I went by the drag name of Venus Lapenis. I created it myself. I'm
sorry, Venus what?
Venus Lapenis.
Venus Lapenis.
I took drag very seriously. I was emceeing shows and doing stuff for several years, and even
you were emceeing in drag.
Yeah.
That's
hosting
so
shows.
Cool.
You know, think of Bianca Del Rio, just not as many jokes and quite
That's
uglier.
so rad.
That was me. but yeah, like I love drag. I love the art of drag. I love performance and anything involving that. I'm like here for it. So I naturally gravitated to it. I actually I started doing drag a little bit here in LA, but I realized that drag is so exhausting. And I basically got rid of all the evidence and got rid of everything that I once had and loved, but I still enjoy it, obviously.
Why did you get rid of it?
Well, when I was done, I was just done. I was like
exhausted.
I don't even want to have the option of like thinking about it. You know what I mean? So it was one of those moments, and I very regret some of it because a lot of the pictures that I used to have, I loved, but I was, it's just, you make decisions in the moment and regret them a little bit later. But those pictures that I posted recently, they were 2 years ago at Mickey's over here in WeHo.
Yeah.
I did a show. I was just like thankful that those existed still, and those were hidden from a friend of mine. He lost them and found them again.
And was that the last time that you performed?
I performed one other time at FUBAR, and that was intense. But I think that's the only other evidence that exists of that time in my life.
That's so cool. Well, hey, let's see here. I know we're running out of time here, but I wanted to ask you about your podcast, Science and Spirituality.
Yeah. So A Cosmic Journey with Demi and Jay. It's a comedy podcast about science and spirituality. So we talk about aliens, we talk about technology, we talk about, stuff going on in the world. And we interview lots of really cool people like artists and drag performers and astrologers and psychic mediums, all kinds of stuff. So it's really fun. And my co-host Jay, we have a really great time recording it.
How did the both of you come up with this podcast?
I came up with it first. It was my kind of solo project for a little while. And then it wasn't until I had an actual astrology reading from Angel Idealism, who was my favorite astrologer. I still visit her. She kind of like clue me in. And so it seemed a little fated that I would have a co-host. And Jay's my best friend, and I interviewed him for the original one, and it just ended up being a thing. So yeah.
And so far, so good. I was watching some of your episodes and it totally drew me in.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can check it out on cosmicjourneypod.com. That's our website. And then we also have stuff on YouTube. It's under my YouTube page currently. So Demitri Wylde on YouTube, and you'll find all kinds of stuff. And
your book that you have, what type of poetry do you have in your book? All Was Nothing in the Time of Champions.
So this is my second poetry book. My first one was called Bitter Blue Pill, Poems of Fantasy and Longing, that kind of came mostly from like a certain summer in my life. And then plus a lot of stuff that I written when I was very young. So I updated it and kind of compiled it into this one. It has a little bit more of a young feel to it. So this one, however, is that person a little bit more grown up. So it's got 3 parts to it. 3 stands for creativity and numerology. And so the first part is affirmations, and it's kind of short form, kind of just personal notes that I used to write to myself to make myself feel better. And so I kind of like changed up some of it and made it more for the reader. So they're kind of like food for the soul, if you will. And then the second part is actually poems, and poems is like real like rhyme schemes and imagery and metaphor and stuff like that. And that's the most creative part of it. Mm-hmm. And then the third part is meditations, and meditations is more kind of like, some are short form, some are long form, essays or thoughts that I'd had and kind of ruminated on, and times of my life and things like that. So, yeah, it just kind of like compiled over the past like 2 years, and I was like, here's another book. So
that's incredible. Well, I can't wait to get myself a copy, and then hopefully I can get an autograph too.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Demitri, so much for being on A Little Less Fear podcast. You have been awesome. You've been incredible. You've been courageous. And I really look forward to seeing the success of your podcast and your book. Thanks so much for being on my show.
Back to you too.
You have a good evening now.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Of course.